when we talk about stress, there's two factors that we know of from our research. One is that our stress, that the way we manage stress and what we perceive to be stressful is one from our genetic code. We know that stress is passed down generationally. We know that if your mother had a very stressful life while she was pregnant with you, that you would be more susceptible to things like childhood obesity, type 2 diabetes, depression, anxiety. We know that there is some that translates into our genetic code. The second thing that matters is our experiences.
Turn this up, turn this up.
Your professional development is one of the keys to your career success. When you combine your desire to grow with actionable steps, your journey to success becomes an incredible reality.
Hi, I'm Paul Horandi, aka IncrediPaul, and welcome to IncrediPaul Leadership, where we learn how to become the most incredible versions of ourselves by learning from each other. First off, if you're just listening to the show, make sure you also watch it on YouTube. But regardless if you're listening or watching, thank you so much for your support. Today, I have the honor of having Dr. Camilla Moore on the show. She's a diplomat in American Academy of Lifestyle Medicine with 16 years of clinical practice in the Doctor of Chiropractic. She's a certified clinical instructor for the Harvard Design SMART program and a regular guest lecturer at Brown University Medical School. So that is an incredible background, Camilla. But how about you introduce yourself the way you would do it?
Thank you so much, Paul. And thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely.
As you mentioned, Dr. Camilla Moore. Yep. The big thing right now that I'm doing, I've left private practice about a year ago to really jump into teaching stress management and resiliency and burnout training. And so that's really what I'm doing right now. My background is I had a private practice. I sold that a few years ago to work for a bigger healthcare organization, had been doing some research with them and through one of the areas in Brown. And so we just expanded their chiropractic research. At that point, there was a little reshuffling about a year ago. And instead of going into private practice, I decided to just continue to, this was like a little side hustle for a while.
Oh, really?
And decided to kind of just keep going down this road. Yeah, the SMART program that I teach, it usually takes a couple of years to get that certification. And lifestyle medicine is really an up and coming specialty. And we have 6 pillars of wellness that we look at. Most of the practitioners are either medical doctors or nutritionists, dietitians, but we look at sleep, health, exercise, nutrition, stress management, limiting substances like alcohol and smoking, and then also social connectedness. So within those 6 pillars, stress management is my specialty. And so that's what we do, is we kind of bring all of those in and how can we use evidence and science to help us manage our stress better and eliminate the risk of burnout.
Yes, burnout is so prevalent now. And you talk about stress management and the 6 pillars. So within those 6 pillars, do you feel like there's one that, and maybe this is a loaded question, do you feel like there's one that people struggle with more than others?
When you're dealing with stress management, I think the biggest mistake that I see that most people make is, and this is just from speaking with, patients over the last 17 years, but also, my one-on-one clients, is they miscalculate where their stress is actually coming from. And we don't take the time to really look to say, okay, let's get some objective data. Let's look at some, do some evaluations and really see like what is at the root. What is the root cause of, these areas where you feel that stress? And so we kind of jump to thinking and assuming that we need to exercise more or meditate more or eat better. And that's not to say that that is not the case. And those are the foundations. Like we need that. But we often miss some of the key aspects of our life that can be causing stress, even if we think that we know that's what it is. If we are caring for if we're part of what they're calling the sandwich generation, right? Like my generation, 40s, 50s, I just aged myself there. Where you
Well,
are,
what does this,
I
yeah,
know.
what does the
Spoiler
sandwich
alert,
generation
I am
mean?
mid
No.
40s. Yeah. So, yeah.
What does that
so
mean? Yeah.
so that means that you're caring for your children, but you are also moving into a caregiving role for your parents.
Oh,
And so you have, both generations that you are most qualified to be and have the responsibility of taking care
mhm.
of. And there was a study that was done that was just published earlier this year, and I think it was out of Denmark. Don't quote me on that one, but it was in the journal Work, and they looked
Okay.
specifically at women of 40s, 50s being burnt out, and what the cause of that was. And
Mm,
so they identified three key factors. One, that women were in general more likely to be part of a career path that had a higher turnover rate. So there was some work disruption that was contributing to it. Two, that they were part of this sandwich generation where they were caregiving for their parents and caregiving for their children. And three, that even though we have a lot more women in the workforce now, the gender specific roles of managing the house and managing
good,
childcare has not really shifted to
good,
counterbalance the careers that women have now.
good.
And so that's what I mean when I say, like, we often think that maybe we should just pick up meditation or pick up mindfulness. But really, it could be a much deeper issue. And unless you
Okay.
have some tools to really work through that and evaluate, then you'll miss it.
Okay. No, I see what you're saying. Like you
Hmm.
can add these things, but you need to have the tools to deal with like what the root cause of it is.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. 100%.
Yeah. So what are some of those tools that you help people either discover or develop?
Yeah. Great question. So that's where, I pull this from. I'll give you one example. We could do it right now.
Yeah.
And this is from the SMART program, the stress management resiliency training program
Mhm.
that I teach online. And it's one of my favorites. So get a piece of paper. You don't have to do this, Paul, but either mentally or later, but like you get a
Okay.
piece of paper and you're going to draw a line down the middle and draw
Yeah.
two columns. And
Okay.
on one side, you're going to put plus for charges. And on the other side, you're going to put a negative sign for drains. And
Good.
then what you do is you're going to take a step back and you're going to make a list of all of the things that are in your life that come to mind first. And then you're going to categorize them based on whether those things give you energy or they take energy.
Oh.
So, for example, I have a 4-year-old, love him to death. He is both an energy giver, right? He gives me energy because being a parent is a beautiful thing, but he's also 4 years old. So he also drains my energy, right? So not a measure of love. I would kill for this child in a heartbeat. But it's a measure of what they are giving to you and what they are taking from you. So if you have, the other example that I love is if you have a dog, right? We're dog people at my family.
Yes.
That is a purely giving part, right? You're going to get energy from that dog. But if you have, for example, an aging parent, that may be just a drain and not so much a positive. And you can list that. So what that does is it starts to quantify, and you can actually see pen to paper what is giving you energy and what is taking energy away. And so you can apply that to any level of specificity. So you can take that and say, okay, I'm just going to do this for my job, just for my work. And you could do that for people. Like Susie gives me energy. She's constantly helping me. She's constantly, but Joey is kind of a drain. And so what that does, though, is it lets you see what aspects of that certain area of your life or your whole life is giving you energy or draining that energy. And it's very eye-opening. Like, it's very eye-opening to see it on paper.
Oh, wow. So then you spend more time with Susie, and then Joey is like, we need to spend a little bit less time together.
Yes. Well, and what this does is it helps you set boundaries in an easier way, because one of the challenges that we have when we set boundaries, even when we use the term healthy boundaries and we know it's good for us, it's really hard to shake that guilt feeling. And so if you have a new context and you can put that into a different perspective of why you are setting that boundary, and you can really see it that, you know what, Joey, really, I need to cut it off here because otherwise I'm going to get exhausted. Whereas, spending some time with Susie is going to help build me up. And that's what we can do is like, it helps to set those boundaries and makes us feel less guilty about it because we have a whole new perspective on what the intention of setting those boundaries are for us.
Wow. Yeah, no, setting those boundaries. No, I definitely resonate with what you're saying about like the guilt you can feel when you realize there's a drain. I know like for myself personally, there's some relationships I had to cut off because they were draining me and not building positive energy. But just like from therapy and understanding that if I'm not good for myself first, I cannot show up well for others. So like really, I think that's a really good insight.
Well, and that showing up for others is also one of the things that we know is such an important piece of being human, is that we want to be able, we are connected people. We survived from the past tens of thousands of years only because we were able to collaborate and work together. We need each other.
Yeah.
And so, being able to harness that energy to the relationships that are most valuable for us is a very important step when we're talking about stress management and burnout management.
No, that's really great insight. So I'm curious, I know you have all this data, you've done all this research. Is this something that you've always been passionate about, or how did you get to the point that you started to work on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting story, and much like most people's lives, mine had a lot of turns and hills, and yes. So I've always been very health conscious. My whole family is. Both of my parents were healthcare professionals. My dad was a physical therapist. My mom was an ICU nurse, and we've always been very, kind of crunchy, holistic. I mean, we had an certified organic farm growing up just for funsies, for funsies. And, but it's always been part of the way that I was brought up. And I had a wonderful family, very, very fortunate. And so I knew I wanted to go into the healthcare field. And so I chose chiropractic because I loved that kind of the marrying of science and holistic care. Like I loved that you could explain how things worked. And so I started getting into more meditation and mindfulness several years ago, right before I decided to sell my practice, because I knew that I wanted a shift. We had been caregiving for a dear friend with Parkinson's, and we were, work was really going crazy, and we wanted a family and yada, yada, yada. So I started practicing meditation with a coach, with a teacher one-on-one, and I did that for years. And so through all of those aspects of my life, we had a lot of fertility treatments. We had COVID. We worked through COVID. We had a child through COVID. That was such a constant, But the meditation piece was such a constant for me, and with just being able to maintain a balance, maintain a foundation. And when I started really looking into the science of it, and at the same time was getting burnt out in my own work, that's when I actually came across the SMART program, and I thought, this checks my boxes, because it fits so well with everything that I believed and the way that we live. And it gave science, and also it allows me still to work with people, work with clients, and I love that part, that one-on-one working with patients. I didn't want to give that up, but I also wanted to move into an area that fed my soul a little bit more. And that's what this was, and that's what this has been.
So that's really incredible. So that really, your passion around working in this area drove you into moving into it seems like.
Yeah. And it's funny because I also, my yoga mind, I'm a registered yoga teacher too. Like my yoga mind, loves kind of the zooming out 30,000 foot view of life. And I love seeing the path of where my life has gone when I've listened to that intuition. And so that's what I see. And that's what I see as like my own journey here is I can see where all of those steps have made sense to where I have ended up. And it leaves me excited to see like, okay, so what's coming next?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's just being able to kind of look from the outside in has been an interesting exercise.
Oh, I'm sure it has been. And so you just keep adding to all the lists of stuff that you do. So also a yoga instructor as well. So I guess like just taking a step back, like what really came first? Because I know you said that your background was like in the medical field with your parents both being doctors and nurses. So was it always that you want to be a doctor and then you kind of moved into the chiropractic, or was there a point that you wanted to be something else? Like kind of talk me through like how you got to what
this
you actually
part.
wanted.
So my dad's a physical therapist. Yes. But I knew I wanted to go into the healthcare field, and I thought I wanted to be a doctor. And so what I started doing was shadowing a bunch of doctors. And I was, it was after undergrad, living and working in Boston. Both of my sisters were there. We were having a blast. Yeah. And no money, but having a blast. And
that's usually the combination, I feel like.
Yeah, right? Especially like the like early 20s.
Yeah.
But I started shadowing a lot of other female doctors for the most part. I wanted to, because I knew that I wanted a family at some point. I didn't know, who that was going to be with, or, how that was going to look like. But I knew I wanted to create that space. And I just, I just noticed that so many of the female physicians were really struggling with the responsibilities of work and being able to have that family. Like it's very, very hard. And a lot of our clients and a lot of the people that go through our program are physicians, because the responsibilities in the healthcare field as a business have skyrocketed for doctors. And there are so many things that they have going on at work that is not doctoring, that are draining their energy. And so it's very easy to get burnt out and very cynical about, your job, especially when those things take away time for your family. So I kind of saw this writing on the wall, and at the same time, I hurt my neck. And and the guy that I was seeing at the time was like, you have to go see my chiropractor. And I was like, absolutely not. And no way am I ever going. But after like a week of I haven't told the story in a long time. After being in such pain for like a week, I was at that point where many of my patients actually ended up being, where like, I don't care what it is. I just want something to help me. And so finally I went in. Yeah, exactly. Just need some relief. And it was wonderful. And he was wonderful. And so as I, worked with him for a little bit, I was like, well, this is really quite interesting. And, my dad being a PT had always been a little like, oh, well, maybe not, there's some, there's a dynamic between chiropractors and physical therapists, although that is shifting as everybody, those that are doing more evidence-based practice, that's shifting. But it was something that I started looking into, and I was like, I think I can have a lot more autonomy at my job. I could have my own practice that would be a lot easier, which was very important to me. I knew I wanted to be a business owner. And it looks like that was a little bit more conducive to balancing work and life. And so I jumped and I did it. And and it was, it's been great. It's interesting being a chiropractor in especially when I was working in like surrounded by, physicians and other evidence-based people. Like they're not quite sure what to think about you, just, really. And so you had to really kind of prove yourself that like, no, this is what we're doing and this is how we're
Mhm.
collaborating. And it was a really beautiful experience working there. It was in a women's medicine collaborative. So we had all of the providers there were women, and we focused on women's health. It was a really special place.
Wow.
So yeah, it was great.
That's absolutely incredible. So I guess with that, what is something that people have a misconception about the chiropractic or some of the stuff you do? Because I know you kind of
Oh,
talked about between physical therapy, chiropractors, physicians. I'm sure there's maybe, I don't know if tension is the right word for it, but like,
yeah, tension's a great word for it, Paul, actually. Tension's a
yeah.
great word. And because there's um I've been doing this a long time, and there's kind of two sets of chiropractors. There's those that are more philosophical driven, and it's a philosophy rather than a science. And
Okay.
then there's those of us that follow the science, and we do. My specialty was myofascial release. I did a lot of muscle work, and then we
Good.
did a lot of exercise training, and hands-on body work like that.
Mhm.
And so it's just a paradigm shift. And anytime there's a shift and a change, there's tension and there's a
Good.
little turmoil. There's also a lot of overlap between um, the kind of content that more evidence-based chiros do and physical therapy. But when they work well together, it's amazing. I worked with physical therapists all the time, and patients loved it, and they got better so much faster.
Mhm.
And so, it really is in healthcare and medicine, it's really less about the profession and more about the practitioner. And that's across the
Amazing.
board. That's across the board with any doctor, with any, you can't
Yeah.
say that all dermatologists are great, and you can't say all dermatologists are not great. You
Mhm.
have to find the ones that match your values and what you're looking for.
Mhm.
And that's the key. But that's the challenge in healthcare right now, is because doctors just don't have a whole lot of time to
Mhm.
spend, because they're constantly on the clock, and they're
Yeah.
also constantly trying to keep up with the administrative tasks that they have now
Mhm.
too.
Yeah.
It's challenging, but tension's a great word for it, Paul.
That just popped into
It'll
my
probably always be there,
okay.
but
No,
my
the
dad's come around.
okay, he's come around. So you got your dad on board. There you
Yeah.
go. That,
Yeah.
that's a key one. But I know that you do a lot of work around because you mentioned the stress management, and
Yeah.
then briefly before the show, before we started talking, recording, we were talking a little bit about imposter syndrome. There's something that comes up on the show a lot, and I talk a lot about resilience. I know that's something you focus on. So I'm
Mhm.
curious, kind of how those things kind of go together between the imposter syndrome and the stress management. You want to talk more about that?
Yeah. So, one, I love that you're talking about resilience, because not everybody knows that term.
Mm,
But it is really, it's, and I have a love-hate relationship with it. We'll talk about that in a minute. Just because
okay.
it kind of invokes this sense of strength and power, when in reality it's the opposite. Like
Mhm.
it tends to kind of invoke that, like, well, if you just, if you were resilient enough, you'd be able to get through your stress.
Mm,
And that is not the case at all. So I usually try to put an asterisk to that, although that is what I mean. Stress management and resiliency training. I mean, it's in there.
mhm.
But imposter syndrome is so interesting, because where we go with it is we have that thought, right? And that thought in our head is, and when I talk about it, I usually just talk about myself, and I become very vulnerable and tell you all of the things that go deep in my mind. So for your listeners and for you, it's okay to be vulnerable.
Mhm.
I'm going to open up. So when you do these exercises, you can open up too. But you
Yeah.
have this thought. And when I started this practice, this business, I knew that I'd have to do things like this and, go
Mm,
on social media. And that was a very uncomfortable place for my introverted self to be.
mm,
Um, and so I'd have these thoughts of, like, you really can't do that, because they're going to know that you're a fraud. Look at all those people. They know so much more than you. And then you say, well, you have a lot of experience and you have a lot of education too, and that's okay. Yes, but this, or yes, but that. Yes, but what if you get rejected, and then you won't be able to work ever, and then you're going to be out on the street and alone? I mean, it
well,
just goes
it
very
just
deep very
spirals.
quickly.
Yeah.
And so when you start really listening to that voice, really listening, then, and this is what I teach. I call it the shift method, and it's 5 steps. So one, you want to listen to what that is. So say the word, say the term that your negative mind is saying. Because the mistake that we make, let me just back up for a sec. The mistake that we make with imposter syndrome is that we think that counteracting the negative idea with a positive idea will neutralize it. And that is not the case. What happens is you have a negative idea, and that positive idea tries to counteract it, but the negative thought is so much more prominent, and then you have to come back with a positive thought and another negative and another positive and negative. And so you get this cycle that is just creating a lot of stress.
Wow.
And so what we have to understand first is where that negative thought comes from. And so that comes from a place of evolution of our stress response. That's the beginning of the stress response, because you have to think, we did not last this long by, looking at the lion going into the den and saying, that sounds like a good idea. I'm going to follow the lion in there. No, we got this far because we are skeptical, because we analyze, and we're able to use caution and exercise caution in a new place. That's how we were able to survive. So that little voice is part of our innate survival mechanism. So you don't want to silence it, and you can't silence it, and you can't counteract it with a logical thought. The piece that we miss is that middle piece. And so one, say it out loud or write it down. 2, you want to hunt for the root cause. And so the way that we can do that is we apply a strategy from corporate management, the 5 whys, right?
Oh,
so
okay.
the 5 whys. So you can apply that here, and you just say, why? Or if that was true, if that was true, why? If that was true, what would that mean? If this is true, and you keep asking that 5 times until you get to the I, which is the identification of the root cause, the root fear. Because at the root of that negative thought is fear, right? Because this is a safety mechanism. What we're talking about is actually a safety mechanism. So at the root of that, you have to say, what am I trying to save myself from, right? So once you identify that, then this is the most important piece, is that's where you can sit with that fear, bring compassion to that fear, bring self-empathy to that fear, and accept it. And this is the uncomfortable, this is the yoga brain, right? Is this sitting with that uncomfortableness and accepting it. You don't bring any opinions to it. You don't bring any context to it. You just say, yeah, this is what I'm afraid of. And you sit with it. And as you sit with it, it will dissipate, because when we bring resistance, when we try to fight the reality, when we try to fight our own truth, that creates the stress. And so up here, right, where you have your negative thought and your positive thought, that's essentially what you're doing, is you are just trying to fight against that. Because underneath that negative thought is the fear, and you're trying to fight against that fear. So this is where mindfulness and meditation practices come in, because the more you practice that, the easier it becomes. And then the last step, you reframe it into a positive. You reframe it. You don't try to negate it because you've already accepted it, but you reframe it and into something that is positive. So for me, what that would look like was, you really want to try this, and I think you owe it to yourself to give it a shot. And that was, that was my positive. But I can't get there without identifying what I was really afraid of, because otherwise you're surface level. You're just trying to counteract the negative with the positive. But working through it, identifying what that root fear is and that root cause is really key. And then bringing compassion. And honestly, like, I literally think of just like my child self, just giving that fearful child a hug. And that, bringing that love to that, works amazingly well. And then you can reframe it.
Wow.
Does that help?
Yes, you just
But
gave a
that's how it's all
massive
that's how
nice.
that's how it's all connected. I Isn't it so
Yeah,
cool? Like, it's so
yes.
cool. But that's how it's all connected, you know? And it's like anything else, if there's one thing that I have learned, it's that whatever you do, you will do more of.
Mhm.
Whatever you do, whatever you practice, you will become good at. And so if we practice this, it will become much easier. No one escapes imposter syndrome
Mm,
because it's part of who we are.
mhm.
But if you can learn what it's about and learn how to interpret it, then you regain your power back.
Wow, that's a bar right there. When you learn how to interpret it, then you'll gain your power back.
Yeah.
That's absolutely incredible. Yeah, and even the shift method. So for those of you listening or watching, you probably want to go back, rewind it, and listen to that again. That was good. But like, even I like what you talked about, like really saying it first, and
Hmm.
really one of the last things to talk about is when you actually shift it to the positive,
Hmm.
because I thought it was really interesting what you said, that when you're trying to combat the fear with the positive, that's actually what creates the stress. And
Yeah. The
that
resistance.
blew my mind.
Hmm. Well, and the other thing is that it can be really challenging to do. So one of the other little clinical pearls, a little hacks that you can do is, instead of, the language matters. So I always think of like you or I, but turn it into the third person. Say your name, Camilla, you are worthless. Camilla, you are going to end up alone. Camilla, and all of a sudden being able to detach your internal brain, detach yourself from that, can really give you some space to hear it in a way that you might not be able to when it's spinning in your head, right? Because that's what happens. Like, it just spins and
Mhm.
spins and spins.
Yeah, and I feel, and I've said it before, I think on here, or talk with friends, is that our self-talk is so important. Like, and the way
Mhm.
that you're talking about to detach from it is that we say things to ourselves that we would you never
Never,
say to a friend,
never.
never say to a friend.
No. And that is, when we talk about stress, there's two factors that we know of
Mhm.
from our research. One is that that the way we manage stress and what we perceive to be stressful is one from our genetic code. We know that stress is passed down generationally. We know that if your mother had a very stressful life while she was pregnant with you, that you would be more susceptible to things like childhood obesity, type 2 diabetes, depression, anxiety. We know that there is some that translates into our genetic code. The second thing that matters is our experiences. And so from a science perspective, we call that epigenetics, like how those genes that we have been that have been passed down, the what we do with them and how they are expressed. So our experience and the choices that we make and the choices that were made for us potentially
Mhm.
affect how we manage stress and what we perceive to be stressful. And it's very interesting from, a parenting perspective, because there's terms now that we never had, like emotional regulation, teaching children how to emotionally regulate. And that's really a lot of this mindfulness of what you're saying, like saying the quiet part out loud, the quiet part in your head, and being able to identify it and address it immediately,
Mhm.
so that, we don't have to be in therapy, like I think many of us have been,
Yeah.
like to try to
Yeah.
figure this stuff out when we're
Oh,
when
yeah.
we're later. But those are really important factors. And that's where, people that have had a very traumatic childhood, that affects them dramatically with what they perceive to be a threat, and how they protect themselves from those threats. And so that speaks directly to our stress.
Wow. Man, you're just dropping so much knowledge. No, I love it. And I know with the stuff you do as well, because I know we were talking, I think you have a course that kind of
Yes.
the course kind of talk more about, or talk to me about the course you have, like what people can get from it?
Yeah. So the course is not my course. I am a certified clinical instructor for it, but this was
Yeah.
developed by the Benson Henry Mind Body Institute at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard
Okay.
Medical School. And so because of that, it has been researched.
Mm.
Not only was it created through evidence-based methods, but it has then been researched. And those are two different things. So we know people that go through this program that they are going to have a third less stress by the end of it. We know that they are going to be
Wow. A
going to their
third?
doctor 40% less, that they are going to have improved measures of health, things like blood pressure, heart rate variability, that we're going to see those measures of health be improved. And so what I have done is I've taken this and created it. One of the things I was really concerned about was accessibility.
Mm.
And so I turned it into an online course, more on-demand format. And so we still have our live sessions every week. We still have, the manual, and we still go through all of these, but you
Then
can go at your own pace. So if you miss a week of the live sessions, you can just jump right in whenever you can. And so I put those, it's a lot of material, and it's a very comprehensive course, but I put them in like less than 15-minute videos. So you can watch them while you are waiting to pick your kid up, or at a lunch break, or listen to them,
yeah.
in the car,
Yeah.
and try to make it very accessible. But we go through one of the things that I really love about this program is how much evaluation that we have, self-evaluation and self-assessment, that can really make this a very personalized journey for you. And we talk about things like exercise and nutrition, things that we know, but then how do you actually implement it? Because we are all overworked and we don't have any time. So then how do you actually make these changes? And one of the things that we have found is that identifying like one of the exercises, like the exercises like the energy battery, where you're beginning to have a new perspective of the things that, your habits and your behaviors, shifting the importance and shifting the perspective of what that does for you and what your core values are, helps to change our daily habits. And those are really the key things. And that's one of the things I love. It meets you where you are. And it's a great starting point. This is what I say is like, if you don't know where you start, you just know how you feel. This is where you start.
Okay. So that's really good to know. I'll make sure that that's linked in the description of the video and
That'd be
also
great.
in the podcast show notes, because I think that is something that's really helpful, because I think a lot of people have no idea where to start. I know we talked a little bit about therapy, which honestly, I feel like everyone should go to therapy at some point, even
Agreed.
if you think you're totally
Agreed.
fine. We're human, so probably not. There's probably
Yeah.
something there that you don't know about.
Well, and the other thing that I love about therapy is that like it's for you, and it's about
Mhm.
learning about you,
Mhm.
I mean, it's just like you have this person in front of you who's just totally interested in
Mhm.
you finding out more about you and
Yeah.
becoming more of the person you want to be. I'm with you.
Yeah.
I think we should all be in therapy.
Yeah, for sure. It helps.
Yeah.
Like in therapy and coaching, because I know some of the there's there's similarities and differences between the two. Because therapy is more like backwards focused, stuff that's happened, and then coaching is more forward focused. But I think both are needed. 'Cause-
Agreed. Because you don't know where you're going if you don't understand where you've been. And
Absolutely.
that's where, and it's the whys, right? Like
Mhm.
that's what it is. Like working with coaches and looking forward, yes, but to understand your own behavior a little bit more, and then to be able to understand the why behind it, helps bring the intention and the motivation to what we
Mhm.
want to do in the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All of this stuff is really helpful. I know, like within stress management and the SMART program, is there any other key things that you feel like are foundational to being able to manage stress?
Yeah, I think it's a big question, but I
Yeah.
think that um, if I had to whittle it down to one thing, it would be to know ourselves inside and out, to really understand what makes us unique,
Mhm.
what makes us us, what we want to give to this world, what do we want to have left with this world, But it all comes down to like understanding who you are, what it is that's important to you, and what you want to do with it. And so with that one aspect, then you can incorporate all of those things about your past, because like who you are is in large part because of your past. And so by really understanding that part of it, you now have to go back and understand how you became that. And
Wow.
then you make the decision, what do you want to do with it? And that's where therapy and mindfulness intersect, because it's really hard to be aware and mindful of something that you don't know exists.
Yeah.
And so if you can have a therapist that helps you with understanding, then you bring the mindfulness and the acceptance. But without understanding the why, that's why like shift method, like without understanding the why and the impact that had on you, then it's really hard to say, oh yeah, I'm okay with it. I'm accepting this for what it is, because you don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
And so that's so much of it, like inside and out, what makes you tick?
Yeah. The self-awareness piece.
Yes.
Like a lot of emotional intelligence, self-regulation as well. Those are all key pieces. And then I almost geeked out when you're talking about the 5 whys, because I have a lot of background in continuous improvement and root cause analysis.
It was familiar.
Yeah, it was very familiar. And that's one thing that I've noticed, is that there's a lot of things within continuous improvement, that whether it's in manufacturing or business, that can be applied to in life. And I think at some point I'll create something that is just like continuously improve your life, something around that.
Well, yes, because business is about productivity. And
There's
so they know that unless you can identify the root causes of a problem, you're not going to be able to solve that problem efficiently. Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, these same methods can apply, you're 100% right, to, introspection and not just corporate productivity.
Absolutely. But it's been a really great conversation, and I feel like we probably talk for hours, but I want to make sure, because there's I feel like there's other things that we didn't wrap up, but we maybe have potentially have you back on. But is there anything that we haven't talked about, or anything you want the listeners to know about you, about stress management, or what you do, that you want to share as we wrap things up?
I think I appreciate that question. I agree with you. I think that we could touch upon so many different things. I think, just to understand that, like, I'm not just a voice on the other line. Like, I'm a real person, and I help real people just like you. And that's available to you. And I'm here, that I'm very flexible with my information. I always have been. I just really want people to have better lives, and to help them, really help them in any tangential sort of way. But I think to understand that, there can be a better way here. We don't have to, I crashed and burned with burnout. You don't have to get to that point to really understand what it is that you can, pick yourself up. Like, you don't, and we don't have many mechanisms. Before the heart attack, you could have the blood work that showed, the high cholesterol, triglycerides, that type of thing. But we don't really have that with stress and burnout. And that's what I love so much about what I do, is that we're able to kind of catch a lot of these things and address them before they become a huge problem. And I work with a lot of people in business too, because especially small business owners and solopreneurs, like, you are your business. So if you talk about like a burnout proof business, that starts with a burnout proof you. And how to actually do that is, there's a process. And there is a better way to do this. And it's a crazy life we live in now. It's a crazy world we live in now. And to be able to simplify it and cut through that noise is a very powerful thing.
Yeah, that is very, very powerful. And you're right. It's a crazy world. Seems like it's only getting crazier.
I know. Every time I think this can't be more crazy, it gets more crazy.
And then there's more. There's this, but wait, it's like the OxyClean commercials, like, but wait, there's more.
But wait.
But
There's more.
yeah, it was just like, but it's not the more that we want. But we could go on and on about that too.
Yes.
But I really appreciate you sharing so much knowledge about what you do
Thanks,
on the
Paul.
show.
I
And
appreciate
the
that.
shift method, like that has really stuck with me as far
It's
as
going to
like,
stick with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it'll stick with you a little bit more now that, because you can't unhear it. And that's what I love about it. Like you can't, now you know, right?
you could,
But thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
no, it's really good. And even sharing that your own background and understanding that like where you were thinking you wanted to go, what you kind of had to work through that process. And then, and we could have gone more into that about even the transition from your own practice to selling your practice to what you're doing now on your own. Like I said, there are so many other ways we could have gone, but I think like what we did talk about was what the listeners needed to hear about.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. That's what we both wanted. And so if they can take some of those things away, then that's perfect.
Absolutely.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah. I want to make sure people know how to connect with you,
Sure.
whether it's your socials or website, whatever you want to share.
Yeah. I'm on Instagram. I just started it like a month ago because imposter syndrome, but I'm on there.
It's real.
I'm for real.
Love
I
it.
know. Like
Yeah.
but I'm on there. Dr. Camilla Moore, you'll find me. LinkedIn is always a great place too. Camilla Moore DC, I think is, but if you just search my name, you'll find me. There aren't that many Camilla Moores running around. And I do have a website, thewellnesscabinet.co, but that will be rebranded soon to Dr. Camilla Moore too. So, but go to Instagram, DM me, and I'm active. I'm posting there at least once a day. So,
Nice.
and fielding questions. So go ahead and meet me there.
Yeah. Yeah. Imposter syndrome is so real on social media. I know when I first started posting, I was like, why am I doing this? And it still happens sometimes. I'm like, should I post this? Should I not? So like, and I know like, especially for the people like the younger professionals, all that stuff, I feel like we're on social media a lot, and it can feel like we're like, even like the shirt I have on, like everyone.
I know.
is
I
trying
noticed that. I love that shirt.
Yeah, that people are trying to be influencers, and this is all about being leadership. Well, leadership
I love that.
is influence. But I think as we focus on the internal side of things, creating the values, having the vision, all those things are more important than just what people are seeing. Because it's an inside out approach. So.
I love that. I love that. But yes, I think what I will say is, and maybe you will agree with me on this, is once you do get started on social media, it does become easier.
Yes, it does.
It's that first jump.
Yeah, so the first jump, for sure. You get over that. But then the consistency is another jump that you have to keep doing it. That's also hard as well. But yeah. But for everyone that's been listening or watching the show, I hope you got something for Dr. Camilla Moore's story or what she's doing, like from experiencing burnout to helping people not experience it with the prevention and all the other things around stress management, resiliency, really combat imposter syndrome, the shift method when you're saying it, hunting it down, identifying it, really sitting with it so that you can reframe it to the positive. Like I said, it's sticking with me. It's something that I'm going to use going forward and point it back to you. But I hope everyone got something from the show so that they can keep being incredible.
Be sure to rate and review this podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform. We'll see you here next time. And be incredible. Incredible.